Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Circling Seattle Sports on Converge Media. Of course, as always, I'm your host here, Charles Hamaker. We are less than a week away from the Winter Classic at T-Mobile Park between our Seattle Kraken and the Las Vegas Golden Knights, with all of the excellent sort of branding that's come with that pays homage to the Metropolitans and to a lot of the hockey history in this city. It'll be good to be back in the ballpark, different than what we're used to with the Mariners in baseball. Thankfully, we have some baseball news to talk about. After last week, I basically said we don't have anything to talk about. The Seahawks have some good progress that they've made. And obviously, they're the first team that we go into, and we've got two games to talk about since the Eagles came into town last Monday, right after we recorded the show. So we've got two games to talk about, and thankfully two wins to talk about, which is very exciting. And we'll look at what that means for this team going forward. So we'll start with that Eagles game. Last Monday, December 18th, versus the Philadelphia Eagles was a 20-17 victory. The Seahawks snap their losing streak. They continue to help the Eagles and their current skid that's continued into this last NFL Sunday with a 20-17 victory. Drew Lock starts this game. There was a lot of confusion whether or not Geno Smith would be able to play in this game. It was determined that they would go into warmups and see if he would be able to go, considering the groin injury that he had suffered in practice leading into this game. He was taking warmups. He was practicing before the game, but ultimately Pete Carroll decided they would rather have him healthy going forward than potentially re-aggravate anything, and they went with Drew Lock. This game, it was a tough one for the offense under Drew Lock and against a pretty solid Philadelphia Eagles defense. It was a 10-3 score at halftime with Seattle trailing, so you're within it. You're within one score. Seattle is able to make the necessary stops late, down by 4 points. Drew Lock is able to find DK Metcalf several times going down the field before ultimately finding Jackson Smith and Jigba up the sideline on a over-the-shoulder catch to give the Seahawks the lead, and ultimately Julian Love, with his second interception of the game, picks off Jalen Hurts in the dying moments to give Seattle a huge victory. So our offensive player of the game, I just mentioned him. I could have gone with a few different directions here. You could have gone with JSN. We're catching the game-winning touchdown, but I instead went with DK Metcalf. He didn't have the biggest game per se. In total, his stat line was 5 receptions for 78 yards. He was big on the final drive, though, beating James Bradbury, Eagles corner, several times to get down the field, coming up big in that clutch situation to help bring Seattle down the field so that ultimately Drew Lock could get that pass, that game winner to Jackson Smith and Jigba. On the defensive side of the ball, Julian Love has stepped up big in Jamal Adams' absence. Talked about Geno Smith being out of this game. Jamal Adams was out of this game as he continues to deal with lingering effects to the surgery he had in the offseason. He was inactive for this game. He was also not at the stadium. Technically, as an inactive, he didn't have to be there, but that's an interesting note that a lot of the fan base has been aware of and been made aware of, and we'll talk about how that relates to the Titans game here in a minute. But Julian Love, signed in the offseason from the Giants, has gotten some scrutiny, as has a good amount of the Seahawks defense, to be fair. But Julian Love in this game, 9 total tackles, 6 solo, 2 interceptions, which were big, and 2 pass deflections as well. As I mentioned, has been big in stepping up in relief as Jamal Adams has been injured. So that one was a big one. Going into this Titans game, though, Geno Smith back in the lineup. Some fans had thought, hey, why not Drew Lock again? We'll talk about that in a minute. But you go in against this Titans team that's not fighting for a playoff spot right now. They still have Derrick Henry. Will Levis, their emergent rookie quarterback, was not able to go, so Ryan Tannehill was in for this game. It was a tough game for Seattle, even though it was one that some fans thought should have been sort of a runaway. It was not. Seattle had to engineer another game-winning drive, beating the Titans by a score of 20-17. And with that comeback, the Seahawks became only the second team in NFL history, the first in 24 years, to have different players lead game-winning drives in back-to-back games, which is remarkable to think about, with Drew Lock and Geno Smith going in and doing that. After the game, Smith talked heavily about this team and how they practice the 2-minute drill often. It's obviously paying off. This one was tough. Seattle couldn't get too much going. Ultimately had, again, to another big drive at the end of the game to lead this one off. And then it was, on the offensive drive, I talked about against the Eagles, DK Metcalf was big, leading Seattle down the field. This time around, it was more spread out. There were a few different notable pass plays that helped Seattle get down the field, including a 3rd and 14 where Geno Smith found Jackson Smith and Jigba straight down the heart of the Tennessee defense. Ultimately, on the goal line, Seattle threw a somewhat of a fade route to Kobe Parkinson, the 6'7" tight end out of Stanford, to use that body, use that big boy football and catch that touchdown. On the defensive side of things, when Tennessee got the ball back, Tariq Woolen, who had been benched against the Eagles, has a big comeback game in this one, making a big tackle at the end of the game to keep the Tennessee receiver inbounds and have the clock run out to end the game. So on the offensive side of the ball, not a ton of big, per se, flashy, superstar type numbers on the offensive side of the ball. But Geno Smith, to be able to come back, lead the game-winning drive, was big in the second half of this game. In total, 25 completions, 277 passing yards, and 2 touchdowns, including the game-winning drive, of course. I know there's been a lot of scrutiny about Geno, and I don't think that's fair. In the second half, completed 15 of his 20 passes for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns. On third down, 5 for 6, 5 conversions and a touchdown, was huge in the second half of this game. Not being able too much to get the run game going, and finally having both of his offensive tackles healthy. So we'll talk about that in a minute. On the defensive side of the ball, a guy that was lighting things up earlier in the season with a sack streak that he had, kind of been quiet as teams have adjusted and schemed to block him better. Second-year linebacker Boye Mafe has been big. Was big in this game, was big earlier in the season as he continued to rack up sacks. But in this one, 6 total tackles, 5 solo, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, and 4 quarterback hits. So really getting after Ryan Tannehill in this one, including a sack on the last Tennessee drive of the game as well, to help kind of put a damper on their drive. Inactives were relatively the same for the Eagles and the Titans game. The only difference was Frank Clark swapped out for Kenny McIntosh between the Eagles and then the Titans game. D'Estridge inactive. Devon Witherspoon has been inactive. So Seattle missing Devon Witherspoon. Obviously, that's a big inactive to have. Jamal Adams has been out. So there are a few topics to talk about here with the Seahawks, whether it be the quarterback situation, Jamal Adams. But before anything else, we'll look at these wins. These wins are big because with a Vikings loss on Sunday, the Seahawks move into the final wildcard spot in the NFC. So that's big, obviously, because, you're back in the playoff picture. You had that 4-game losing streak, that tough stretch of the 49ers, the Cowboys, the 49ers again, and then the Eagles. You only get 1 win out of it. But you could argue that those tough games against the NFC's best have made you a better team, per se. I'm not going to say that this Seahawks team is now sort of invincible, but they're battle tested, and that's what you need going into the playoffs. It's still a tough road. You still have 2 games to play. That's not guaranteed, but you control your own destiny. And we've talked about this on this show with different teams. The Mariners last season controlled their destiny to get to the playoffs. Ultimately, they failed. They had it in their hands and they failed. The year before, they had it in their destiny and they were able to punch that ticket to the postseason. So at the end of the day, no matter what sport it is, I would rather control my destiny than have to rely on other teams when it comes to the postseason. Next week, it's not going to be easy. You're playing a Steelers team that is without Kenny Pickett. They are going to start Mason Rudolph next week, but they're the same record as the Seahawks. They're fighting for their playoff lives as well. So it's 2 teams that want to get to the same place, and they have to go through each other to do so. So I like where this team is going. You have most of your offensive line healthy. You've got your tackles healthy, which is big. Your weapons are incredible at the wide receiver position. Kenneth Walker seems to be fully back, which is massive as well. On the offensive side of the ball, I mean, you use Kobe Parkinson, who on your depth chart is arguably your third tight end, which was nice to see him get involved. They haven't really thrown a lot of red zone targets to the tight end since Jimmy Graham was here. And even then, when he was a Seahawk, they only did that in his last season. On the defensive side of the ball, it's tough. It's very tough. Without Devon Witherspoon, who is such a big, dynamic corner who can help in the run game, is a great cover guy as well. That's tough. You like to see Tariq Woolen, after being benched against the Eagles, have a big game against the Titans. The bench, John Wooden, the legendary John Wooden, said that the bench can be a coach's best friend. Help teach those lessons to some of these players. Draymond Jones is he's had an interesting season, not the easiest, but with Uchenna Nwosu going out earlier in the year, he's moved from inside defensive line to out on the edge to help this pass rush. He had one of the sacks that Seattle had, 6 sacks against the Titans. I talked about Boye Mafe. Seattle leads the NFC in sacks. You think that would help them be a better defense? They're dealing with some things. Anyway, they've helped. Against the Eagles last week. Being able to kind of limit that offense. Jalen Hurts wasn't able to get a lot. He didn't look great in that game. He threw 2 picks. That running game as well. They've got a strong running game. They got one of the best offensive lines in the league. Seattle was able to help mitigate that, get their offense the ball back to lead to that Drew Lock game-winning drive. Same thing with this. I mean, you're playing Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry threw a touchdown against the Seahawks. They had to get creative. They had to get crafty late in the game. Seattle was able to make the stop to get their offense the ball back. So, it's been impressive to see both sides of the ball be relentless, be resilient as they move forward and try to figure some things out as this season goes on, as they battled some of the tougher teams in the NFC. With the quarterbacks, I know there were a lot of fans who were, pounding the table for Drew Lock. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. If you look at that Eagles game, most of his passing yards come on that game-winning drive. It doesn't make sense to say, oh, yeah, there's a quarterback controversy now. I get it. It was an excellent story. It was great for Drew Lock to come in. Everybody was playing Put On by Jeezy because of his video that went viral when he was with the Broncos. I get it. It was great. I had fun with it too. It doesn't make sense, though, to start him over Geno Smith, who can throw the ball better, who leads the offense better, and is just more experienced. I'm sorry. I understand the Drew Lock thing. It was a fun experience. He very well could get a contract somewhere else next year. I get that. But I just think Geno Smith makes more sense as your quarterback right now. I'm not saying he is your future quarterback. That's a different discussion that we need to have in the offseason, but he will do for right now. He fits the bill for what you're doing in this current moment. End of discussion. There shouldn't be anything more than that. The Jamal Adams situation, that's interesting. Not being in the stadium for the Eagles game that Pete Carroll was aware of. And there hasn't been anybody that's necessarily disputed that. Adams himself hasn't disputed that because he hasn't been around. And then against the Titans, didn't travel to Nashville. I understand, if you're dealing with an injury and you want to rehab it, that's fine. But, it says something, at least to me, that he wasn't present at either game. Devon Witherspoon has been inactive for both of these games. He was very presently at the Eagles game he's been very present about hyping his teammates up, whether it was week 1 when he didn't play. There's been a video when Bobby Wagner comes out to introductions. He's losing his mind about how excited he is to see Bobby Wagner come out. Against the Eagles, there's sideline video of him hyping up fellow first-round pick Jackson Smith-Njigba. It's there's a difference here, and I get it. There are different situations per se. Jamal Adams has dealt with a lot of injuries throughout the course of his career and has had a relatively tough tenure here in Seattle. Devon Witherspoon's brand new here in a Seahawks uniform. But, the effort is something that's visible and apparent to me, and that's why that sticks out. So the Jamal Adams situation is something certainly to be discussed going forward, especially with the play of Julian Love, who had another solid game against the Titans after his wife, congratulations, by the way, just had their child a few days before, and he had to come to Tennessee separately. He had a big game as well. So, again, the effort stands out to me. If it's a parent, the efforts being made is my point. So that's where we are with that. The Seahawks sit at 8-7 right now, which is still good for third in the NFC West because the Rams keep winning, which is frustrating. And why the Seahawks aren't the 6th seed in the NFC. The Rams, because they swept the Seahawks this season, have the tiebreaker. So going forward, though, you are still in the playoff spot. And as I mentioned, you control your own destiny. So that starts 2 games left. That starts on Sunday, December 31st against the Pittsburgh Steelers with a 1:05 p.m. Pacific time kickoff. That game will be on Fox. It's not going to be an easy one. Again, the Steelers under Mike Tomlin have incredible consistency. I'm not saying they're the best team in the AFC, but they've been incredibly consistent. They're a hard-nosed football team. TJ Watt's going to play some factor in this game as well. And they're fighting for their playoff lives as well. They have the same record as the Seahawks. It's not going to be some sort of pushover that's going to be easy for Seattle in this one. So we move over here. As I talked about last week, there's no Mariners news. What's happening? Why is it so quiet? Christmas Eve, that changed. The Mariners gave out a 2-year, $24 million deal to catcher/designated hitter Mitch Garver. Garver won the World Series last year with the Texas Rangers. Has had some injury issues, staying healthy, being able to put together at-bats, but he does have some proven power. That's big for this Mariners lineup, but it shouldn't be the only move that they make. There's been a lot of discourse about this move. Why are you signing another catcher? Yada, yada, yada. Point being, if we look at the thing down here, Garver is meant to be the primary designated hitter. From sources, that is how the Mariners view him. They haven't had a primary designated hitter since Nelson Cruz, which, if you remember, Nelson Cruz was a few years ago, more than a few years ago. He does have some red flags. I understand that, but he makes the Mariners better than where they currently sat before they signed him. And again, it needs to be only the first step. You need some outfielders. I need an everyday third baseman. I don't want it to be Urias. I'm okay kind of with sticking with Josh Rojas at second base. I know that's not the most popular opinion, but he showed some flashes at the end of the year last season and really wasn't necessarily able to get fully settled here. But, I feel good about him. So, yeah, there needs to be other things done if you're going to be better than you were at the end of last year. And if you're going to compete in the AL West, you still have to compete with the Astros. They're not going away yet. You have to compete with this Rangers team that just won the World Series, and didn't necessarily lose a ton. So I don't know. Yeah, with Mitch Garver, you're looking at him here. His WRC plus was at 138, which would have been the best in the Mariners lineup if he was on this team last season. So, and a few days before, the Mariners had lost Tom Murphy to free agency as he signed a 2-year deal with the San Francisco Giants. If we compare the numbers overall, Garver has a lot better numbers than Tom Murphy in just about every stat, whether it be WAR, games played appearances, hits, home runs, RBIs, stolen bases. To be fair, Garver has 2, Murphy has 0. We go down the list, OPS plus, OPS, etc. So I'm fine with this move. Again, it fills a designated hitter spot that you really haven't been able to cement over the course of the past 6 years or so. It was a struggle this year. You hoped that guys like Cooper Hummel would fit in there. Tommy La Stella, that didn't work. You tried to dip your hand into the giant bin of discount CDs at Walmart and you hope to pull out an Emmy. It wasn't going to happen. Garver, I feel happy with that. That's your primary designated hitter. Leave him alone. He can give Cal days off. I know that you brought in Zebi Zavala. That's fine. But I trust Garver more to do that. Even then, if you've got those 2 guys on your roster, one of them on your bench, more reason to keep Cal Raleigh healthy and give him some days off. So feel confident in that. But again, it cannot be the only thing that the Mariners do. Where do they sit if they're still looking at Randy Arozarena and Isaac Paredes? Is that still in the realm of possibility? It can't be the only move that the Mariners make. It just simply cannot. So that's all we've got for the Mariners. Again, I know I talked about it oh, there's finally some Mariners. That's the only thing that happened. You know, it happened on Christmas Eve. It just kind of dropped out of nowhere. We move over to the Kraken here. They're keeping things moving forward, which is big as we headed into the holiday break. So that started with the first 3 games of a 4-game stretch on the road. The first of those, December 18th at the Dallas Stars, a 4-3 loss in overtime. So you still get 1 standings point. At least you keep your point streak alive, which is massive as we continue to try to inch back our way into the wild card. Our player of the game forward, Matty Beniers, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points, a 3+- and 4 shots on the day. This one was tough. Seattle goes down early by a 2-goal deficit thanks to some poor defensive lapses by their own fault. They're able to climb back into it as the top line of Tomas Tatar, Matty Beniers, and Jordan Eberle kind of helped drive the offense. Eli Tolvanen ties things late as the Kraken pull the goaltender and put out the 6th skater to provide the extra offense late, but they do fall ultimately in the overtime period. So that's one's tough. Dallas at the top of their division, one of the best teams in the Western Conference in the NHL. You take the 1 point, you're happy with it, right? You go then, you play the second time in 3 games against the LA Kings. You finished off your homestand with them, and then you play them here, the second game of this road trip. You beat the LA Kings in Crypto.com Arena, should be Staples Center, by a score of 2-1. This one on national television. Our player of the game, Joey Daccord. Joey plays excellent as he has during the entirety of this stretch that he's been making starts with Philip Grubauer injured. Joey on the night, 42 saves and a .977 save percentage. Those 42 saves tied the franchise record for a single game for the Kraken. It was 43, but the NHL did make a change, and they took away one of the saves, which is just downright cruel, man. And it's funny, Joey ties his own record that he set earlier this season with 42 saves against the Carolina Hurricanes at home. So big one there to get that against the Kings. I mean, again, one of the best teams in the NHL. They're an absolute wagon, and they're in the Pacific Division as well. So you're going to see them. It's nice to go down into their house and beat them and get 3 out of 4 total points against them in the 2 games that you've played against them so far this year. So going into it, there was 2 days off. They were in California, so hypothetically, they could have gone down to Disneyland if they wanted to. But regardless, December 23rd, they get back to it. In the final game before the holiday break, the Kraken take down the Anaheim Ducks by a score of 3-2. This one, a little bit more in control. You know, that Dallas game was one they had to come back into. The Kings game was one where they got the lead and they had to hold on to it for dear life. This one, a little bit less stressful than those per se. Seattle scores the first 2 goals early on. They feel good about it. Anaheim gets one in the second period. You're like, all right, this might be trouble. Tomas Tatar scores one in the third to give them that 2-goal lead back. Trevor Zegras then comes out and scores a lacrosse-type goal. Now, if you don't know what that is, basically Zegras got the puck on the end of his stick, picked it up, which is very untraditional for standard ice hockey, and jammed it into the net with it on his stick. That doesn't happen. It takes a lot of skill. Zegras has done it the most out of anybody in the league. And it's the second time that day that anybody had done that. Chicago's Connor Bedard did that earlier in the day. So that brought the deficit for Anaheim down to 1. Seattle is able to hold on, waste the time, and salt that win away. Our player of the game in this one, defenseman Vince Dunn. Dunn, 1 goal, 2 assists, 3 points, a 1+- and 3 shots. His first assist on Oliver Bjorkstrand's first period power play goal gave him 100 career assists as a member of the Kraken, making him the first player in franchise history to do so. So looking into it, our player of the week, once again, Joey Daccord, in net last 3 games, 97 saves, facing 105 shots on goal for a .933 save percentage, has just continued to be an anchor. I thought with those 2 days off and with the streak that Joey has had, that perhaps we would see Chris Drieger get into the net against the Ducks. That was not the case. It'll be interesting to see who starts in their next game as Philip Grubauer continues to work back from injury. But again, you have to admire the sort of effort that Joey Daccord has had here. That makes it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, That's 8 consecutive starts, 8 consecutive appearances, and 7 straight starts. Let me make 2, 4. So yeah, that's 8 consecutive appearances and 7 starts, which is just absolutely ridiculous. You're hoping you're not burning the guy out, but Joey has been massive for this Kraken team. You really can't understate the sort of performance and effort that he's been able to give here, which has just been big. Last season, around this time, more so in January, and I mean we're getting close to that. Martin Jones had this sort of performance. I feel as Philip Grubauer had suffered an injury around that time as well, and came in and just was an absolute workhorse in the net for the Kraken. Same thing with Joey right now. I talked about it last week. I think I talked about it the week before, and I'll talk about it again. I had some concerns about whether or not Joey would be able to handle this sort of workload at the NHL level, and he's blown through that. Absolutely. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of contract he gets from the Kraken moving forward, because with this sort of play, it should be a longer term deal. But yeah, he's been excellent in the net for Seattle, especially as they've dealt with uncertainty, dealt with the bad puck luck. Obviously this stretch is big, but he's been solid all season for the Kraken. So just looking at it here, we do have some injury-related notes. Unfortunately, it feels like we have something relating to injuries every week. But forward Pierre-Edouard Bellemare will be out for 4 to 6 weeks due to an injury that he suffered. So that one's really tough to kind of bear. Considering all the injuries that the Kraken have already. I mean, you think about Jaden Schwartz being on long-term injured reserve, Andre Burakovsky being on injured reserve, Philip Grubauer is obviously on injured reserve, as we've talked about. So it's not been an easy season at all for Seattle for a multitude of reasons, but this just kind of adds to it. You've got now Bellemare, Schwartz, Burakovsky, Grubauer all out injured currently. Justin Schultz had been dealing with an injury. Jared McCann missed that game against the Kings. So it really has been hard for this team to stay healthy. And that's just the bad luck of things. They were relatively healthy last season, and that hasn't been the case for them this season. It's just kind of how the sports work out. So that one really tough for Seattle. I mean, to lose another player to an injury is not easy. We'll try to see if we can find the upper or lower body. I know in hockey it's very up or down to whether you get those sort of lower body injury. A lower body injury in that game on the road against the Stars, approximately 4 to 6 weeks. So that is about it for the past week of news relating to the Kraken. Looking ahead, 2 of these games are not like the other. The Kraken sit at a 12-win, 14-loss, 9-overtime loss record. They sit at 5th in the Pacific Division. They are tied for 4th with the Calgary Flames, but Calgary owns the better win percentage in that one, and they probably own the head-to-head record. So Seattle is in 5th in the Pacific. Looking ahead, their next game is tomorrow, December 27th, at the Calgary Flames with a 6:30 p.m. Pacific time start. Despite the Flames not quite being the sort of juggernaut team that they have been in recent years, over the course of this season so far, they've had the Kraken's number so far. So looking to change some fate there, looking to end off this little road trip with a positive note. Then the Kraken will come back for one more game ahead of the Winter Classic. It'll be at home December 29th versus the Philadelphia Flyers. That is a 7 p.m. Pacific time puck drop. The Flyers, they're a pesky team. They're a hardworking group, but they I don't want to say that. I'd say you should beat them, but again, it's the NHL. Anything can happen any given night. And then Monday, January 1st, at T-Mobile Park versus the Las Vegas Golden Knights. At noon is the NHL Winter Classic at T-Mobile Park. Obviously a big event. There will be a bunch of different things going on leading into the game itself. I know a bunch of friends of mine are already getting their tickets. They're getting ready to go. We're excited to be able to be on site, be on assignment there, and cover all of the events going into the week. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing, I know Sir Mix-a-Lot's going to be there for the some entertainment. They've got a bunch of Seattle sports legends they're going to bring out for the second intermission. And it'll be cool to see T-Mobile Park transfer from the normal ballpark that we're used to into a rink that holds ice hockey. So that wraps us up for this week's episode, December 26th of Circling Seattle Sports on Converge Media. Great to be back, of course, in studio, as always, with you. Shout out to Omi behind the camera for me there. It's interesting past week, but a good past week, right? I mean, the Seahawks with 2 wins. The Mariners actually make a signing. Again, there needs to be more that follows that, of course. And the Kraken continue. They've got a 6-game point streak currently running, which has helped them. Obviously you'd like more than just the 1 point in these games, but it keeps you around. It keeps you in the fight for the wild card, despite the struggles you've had on the ice and in terms of health throughout the course of the year. So until we see you next week, we're going to do it same thing next week, Tuesday, because the Winter Classic is on Monday at noon. Until we see you then, take care of yourselves, be well, and do whatever you can to make today a great day.